Ladies, gentlemen, and tarnished of all ages, sometimes things change, but quite often they stay the same. There are a number of new fun and silly powerful builds in Shadow of the Erdtree, but with all that excitement and especially in the face of some extremely heightened challenges as far as boss difficulty, at least compared to the base game, it can be easy to forget about what worked best in the past and why it was so strong before. And while they may not be quite as much talked about at this point as, they're not really part of the brand new stuff within the DLC, they are still at least as strong as they were before, if not made better as a result of new additions. So today, we're going to talk about 3 builds that originate from the base game that just absolutely destroy the DLC. These won't necessarily be in any particular order, so much as they are just all very, very strong in their own right, and honestly, they're also quite different playstyles from each other, so you actually have something to choose between if you like this concept. So these are going to be the things that you can at least mostly build up before ever setting foot in the realm of Shadow, and go in feeling just about as powerful as possible from that position if that's something you're into. Without further ado then, first up is Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike. This was pretty much as strong as things got within the base game of Elden Ring. All it took was getting one charged spell cast off somewhere near the boss, and with the right setup, the boss was dead. At least if, you got the RNG to have multiple bolts hit them. Sometimes it took a few tries, but there was no real skill involved, it was just actually having it line up. This is honestly not really different in Shadow of the Erdtree. Bosses have more health, but there is Shadow Tree Blessing level system, and there's even ways to boost this damage further, simply due to additions within the DLC itself. It might take one extra cast, but for the sake of showing how strong it is, this is for the most part just the base game version of the build, only minor upgrades. I've not done the full DLC version of it yet, and watch how destructive this gets. To actually get this thing running for yourself, then you want the spell itself, of course, then you ideally want 2 Gravelstone Seals, one in each hand, as they boost Dragon Cult incantations by 15%, and this stacks. You can only get one of these per playthrough normally, but you can also use an Erdtree Seal for the actual casting, just having a Gravelstone in the offhand for the buff on top of that, and another alternative offhand is a dagger that has the Endure weapon skill, just so you can actually cast the spell more consistently too. And on top of that, you also want a light straight sword in your actual offhand as well, just to actually put seppuku on, because we're going to be using that to trigger the White Mask Helmet, as well as the Lord of Blood's Exaltation Talisman for a combined 30% bonus to all damage that we do for 20 seconds after doing it. You just use that before starting a boss fight, because generally if the fight's not over in 20 seconds with a spell, then honestly you'll still be very happy that you had it for the first 20 seconds, because the boss is probably nearly dead anyways. Past that then, you want the Godfrey Icon Talisman for a 15% boost to damage with charged spells, which this is, Lightning Scorpion Charm for a 12% boost to lightning damage, which this is, and then the Phlox Canvas Talisman for an 8% boost to incantation damage, which this is. Past that, there's of course lightning damage boosts in your flask. You can even use this with the Poise boosting flask upgrade or an Iron Jar Aromatic, because again the damage is so high that guaranteeing the cast itself does so much good. For general stats for this one, you mostly just want to hit 80 Faith, otherwise Endurance for some heavier armor, and Mind for multiple casts if you really need it, and of course Vigor, but that goes unspoken. Moving on to our next entry then today, let's talk about a classic build that we first talked about way back in the first couple of months after the game released, and we actually fully redid this one just earlier today with the new DLC additions to it too. The Scavenger's Curved Sword Jumping Attack build. This just shoves together a hell of a lot of different damage buffs to make an already heavy hitting weapon just hit harder and harder and harder until the boss just falls over in the blink of an eye. Maybe a couple of blinks with the health that they have in the DLC, but still just incredibly super quickly and ridiculously comfortably too. This simply works on the offensive engine that is the Scavenger's Curved Sword, ideally one of these in each hand, but this can't be done normally in a single playthrough, though you can always run a Bandit's Curved Sword on Blood Affinity instead in one of your hands for a slightly less effective version of the same build. Anyways, the Scavenger Sword should be set to occult scaling for high physical damage scaling with arcane, as well as build-up scaling for the base blood loss on the weapons too. This provides massive damage from the weapons themselves, and extremely frequent bleeds when combined with the Seppuku Ash of War going on the weapons as well. Past that, you stick in your bleed bonuses, because this build gets bleeds extremely frequently, then you stick in your multi-hit talismans and Wondrous Flask as well to get a ton of bonus damage with successive attacks. Then you can even include some of the new, more general damage boosts in the DLC, like the Blood-Sucking Tear for another 20% damage, or 2 pieces of Rakshasa armor for another 4% damage, and it all just comes together to just absolutely melt through bosses. Not to mention, it is relatively easy to take the exact same setup, put on Letta's armor piece as a chest piece, and Lacerating Cross Tree as a talisman, and then you suddenly have a sprint attack version of this build that is exactly as effective, but changing up the angle and timing of the attack over doing jump attacks, which is honestly genuinely useful to do for certain boss shapes or movement patterns. And as far as the stats for this this one, 80 arcane for the soft cap of arcane damage scaling, 25 faith to actually reach that requirement for your buff spells, a little bit of endurance for stamina more than anything, and that's honestly pretty much it. Finally then, today you probably expected this one. It is the Blasphemous Blade, where the previous two builds are prolific for their sheer amount of damage output, making survival just an honestly secondary concern. Blasphemous Blade is known for doing an insane amount of damage still, while also healing you every time you use the weapon skill, which is where the damage comes from anyways. And this is just an insanely powerful combination when the skill can also be launched at range, costs relatively little FP to use, and as of the DLC can also be buffed in even more ways than it was in the base game as well. There are some bosses that are resistant to fire in the DLC, but there are also a few that are very, very weak to fire, so it sort of evens out in a crazy way, and even the ones that are supposedly resistant to fire will still die to this relatively quickly, just because the weapon is as strong as it is in the first place. Not to mention, if the fight does drag out a little bit, you have an insane amount of sustain due to the healing that you get when using the weapon skill too. To build past the weapon itself then, you want your classic buffing incantations and Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. Rakshasa armor in the DLC is great for this as well as a general damage booster, Fire Scorpion Charm for 12% damage boost, Shard of Alexander Talisman for a 15% damage boost, the brand new Magma Talisman for another further 15% boost to the weapon skill damage, because Blasphemous Blade's weapon skill actually counts as magma for some reason, because, you know, it needed another talisman that boosted it by another 15%. And then, you know, a bit of a free choice final slot, but the Carrion Filigreed Crest Talisman to reduce the FP cost of the weapon skill by 25% is honestly really just always a good call for this weapon. You can also run this with a shield in your offhand too to increase safety even further, as you don't need to two-hand the weapon to use the weapon skill, and it gains nothing from strength as the damage is all based on your faith scaling, and then it just becomes just an extremely comfortable build that honestly feels like it just happens to have an insanely strong weapon skill on top of it. And then for your Wondrous Flask, of course, you want the 20% bonus fire damage tier, as well as the blood-sucking tier for a 20% bonus to all damage, and the healing of the skill easily counteracts the health drain negative effect from this too. For the stat spread using this, you want 80 faith, which is the main attribute that the unique skill actually scales with, the minimum strength and dexterity to wield the weapon, endurance to weight requirements, and then split endurance and mind depending on if you feel you need more FP or more stamina, honestly based on your own experience. That just about does it for today then, everyone. 3 builds from the base game that just absolutely crush the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC from start to finish, with the vast majority of their power also coming before you even touch Miquella's hand to enter this realm. If you are looking to have a second run through the DLC that's just a mad power fantasy, basically, these are incredible ways to do it from the very start. And while their bases haven't changed since the release of the DLC really, every one of these is simply better now with the new content added into the game, and so you can even improve them on your journey through the DLC too. I hope you've enjoyed this video then, and hopefully you also enjoy using any of these builds for yourself if you choose to do so. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.